Welcome to another episode of The Bird Calls. I'm your host, David Grubb. Thank you for joining me. The New Orleans Pelicans open the preseason with a Monday matinee matchup with the Orlando Magic. And to talk about the Magic, I am joined by senior writer at Orlando Magic Daily and host of Locked On Magic, Phillip Rossman-Reich. Phillip, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me on. I love going to New Orleans. I was actually at the game last year in New Orleans. First time in the city. Had an amazing time. So happy to be on here since our two franchises are apparently very good friends.
It's going to be an intimate month for the Magic and the
Yes,
Pelicans. 3 times over the next 30 plus days, these teams will meet. First 2 games of the preseason, and then again on November 8th in Orlando. As you know, Phillip, look, the Magic have dominated the Pelicans in recent years. They've won 5 in a row in this series, 10 of the last 12 games between these two franchises. And last season, Orlando dominated, winning the 2 games by a combined 26 points. First and foremost, why do the Magic match up so well with the New Orleans Pelicans?
Yeah, it's hard to say. I mean, I think some of it is just the size. And it's the reason why the Magic are kind of in the position that they're in now is they have this very funky lineup with these 2 ball handling 6'10" forwards, and that's tough for a lot of teams to deal with. And Zion Williamson's obviously a load himself, and is certainly super athletic, but he's not guarding Paolo Banchero very often. Paolo's kind of had his way with the Brandon Ingram matchup or with who's matching up with him. And then whoever's not matching up with him, Franz Wagner has their way with. So Orlando's they've just had the right mix of, even their defensive style, I think has been a good matchup for Orlando. So it's been a weird mix. Obviously, New Orleans grabbed a Magic killer, and DeJounte Murray had 2 game-winning shots against the Magic last year. And so it's going to be an interesting matchup to see how these 2 young teams still evolve.
There's something, kind of similar about both these franchises. Both of them built around scoring Duke big men. Both of them have coaches who have seen improvements in their win totals each and every year. But also they're at the point for both franchises, kind of, the Magic after what they showed in the regular season and the playoffs last year. There are expectations. Certainly the Celtics, the Knicks, and the Sixers will get the most of the headlines in the East, but the Magic have to feel like they're a dark horse team to, if not get to the Eastern Conference semifinals, maybe be a sneak into the Eastern Conference finals if you get the right matchup. And one of these teams is not at 100%, which can certainly happen, as we've seen with the stars on all these teams in recent years. So overall, it feels like the Magic are really an ascending franchise for the first time in a while.
Yeah, absolutely. And this Magic team believes that they're going to do something very special. They finished with the 5 seed in the Eastern Conference last year. They spent all summer, in a series where the home team won every game. They spent all summer saying, if we would have had home court advantage, we would have beat Cleveland. We would have been in the second round. A lot of the questions about this franchise, there'd be a lot more hype around this franchise and this team. So there's a lot of determination to not be satisfied with what they did last year. And they have continued to say it as training camp is open. They believe they can be a home court advantage team. They believe they can be a top 4 seed in the East. They are very confident that they are a team on the rise, and they hope that they have the formula to get back there. Obviously, it's a very competitive Eastern Conference now.
Well, let's talk about some of the additions to the Magic from last season. Kentavious Caldwell-Pope has to be the top amongst them. What does adding him to the backcourt? Because the backcourt has really been the part that has to come together for this franchise. How does adding him to that mix help the Magic?
I mean, it helps in so many ways. I mean, obviously the most obvious is his shooting. He's shot 40% or more from 3, 40% or better from 3 in 3 of the last 4 seasons. And the one season he didn't, he shot like 39.6 or 39.7, something like that. This Magic team was 23rd in the league last year in 3-point field goal percentage, 29th in the league in 3-point field goals attempted. They made the fewest threes in the league last year. So having just some extra shooting goes such a long way for this team. Not that, Gary Harris was a poor shooter by any means, but Kentavious Caldwell-Pope is the kind of shooter that maintains some gravity and gives such a vital outlet for a player like Paolo Banchero, who's tried to drive to the basket all the time. On top of that, he is an all-defensive team-level defender, as I'm sure you guys know in New Orleans, having seen Denver a lot more over the last 2 years than Orlando has. He grabbed about a dozen votes for all-defensive team last year. He adds to one of the best defenses in the league from last season. But beyond that, this is a young Magic team. I think they're still the 6th or 7th youngest team in the league. They need a veteran voice in the locker room. They need a guy who has been there. If they have aspirations of winning a championship, they need someone who's been there. And Kentavious Caldwell-Pope's won 2 championships with the Lakers in 2020 and with the Nuggets in 2023. So this is a guy that has seen a lot, obviously, around the league, but has been to the top of the mountain, has been where the Magic are trying to go. And that experience is going to help them grow and take that next step.
The guys that I think that, your younger veterans, where you talk about a Cole Anthony and then Jalen Suggs, who a lot is expected of him at this stage in his career, as we've seen him on a good trajectory so far. How important is it for those two guys in particular to make a leap this season? You know what you've got in the front court pretty much, but the backcourt has to be a little bit more consistent.
Yeah, it's absolutely humongous. I mean, you could look back at the Magic's playoff series against the Cavs, and Jalen Suggs had an okay series, but was wildly inconsistent. Gary Harris just had a bad series, plain and simple. So upgrading the backcourt was really a big deal. But obviously, the Magic are heavily invested in some of these young players. Cole Anthony starting his extension contract now. Jalen Suggs will probably sign an extension with the Magic to stay with them before the season begins. Maybe he will, maybe he won't, but he'll be with the Magic for a little while. These guys are just so vital. And as Orlando tries to take that leap, they had the second or third best defense in the league last year by defensive rating. They were 23rd in the league in offensive rating. They had the worst offensive rating among all teams that made the playoffs last year. This team has to find some more consistent scoring or some more consistent offensive playmaking from that backcourt. And the way that they went about their summer, they added Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, who is not a playmaker by any stretch. They're betting big on these young players taking another step. They let Markelle Fultz go, who was their backup point guard last year too. They're betting that they can spread some of that playmaking around. Paolo and Franz will get their share of assists and responsibility on the ball, but they're betting that Jalen Suggs, Cole Anthony, and even a second-year player like Anthony Black can step into bigger roles and grow into the players that they need to compete for championships.
Another player that you kind of heard about during the offseason and good things, Jett Howard. You talk about adding shooting to this rotation and making sure you have guys who can knock down shots. That's how he earned his reputation coming out of college. Do you think that he's rounded out his game? Is he going to be one of those players that could be a surprise for the Magic in year 2 for him?
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how the rest of this rotation shakes out because, there are, it is a lot of players back from last year, but there are, a lot of holes to fill in and plug in. And the Magic have these like a group of like young players who should be pretty good shooters, but we just don't know. And Jett Howard's certainly one of them. He played only 67 total minutes in the NBA last year across 18 games, played most of the season with the Osceola Magic in the G League. And he looked impressive. He shot 38% on like 9 3-point attempts per game, came into summer league, looked a lot more complete and well-rounded as a player. It's not only that he was shooting the ball well. He averaged those 10 for 21 total in 3 games in summer league for whatever summer league numbers are worth, but he looked more engaged defensively, which was a big knock on him in the draft process. And he looked like a better and more capable playmaker and creator as well, which is obviously a big thing for this Magic team with how versatile they try to be. Whether he's able to get into the rotation, a lot of that's going to come down to what happens over this past week and the next couple of weeks as the Magic lead into the regular season, because he's competing with a lot of other players who also should be fighting for playing time, whether it's Caleb Houston, Magic second-round pick from 2 years ago, who got a lot of playing time last year, volume shooter, excellent shooter for this Magic team, just waiting for a little bit more consistency. They drafted Tristan da Silva, who's showed that he could be a very capable shooter in summer league as well. Trying to find a spot in the rotation for him is not so easy either. So there's a lot on the line for these young Magic players. And, Jamal Mosley's going to have to figure out which one of them he trusts the most as they get into the season and build these rotations. And he's going to have to be willing to say, okay, this guy may not have it. Let's throw Jett in there and see if he can make some threes for us and spark us a little bit. That's the kind of player Jett Howard can be.
Before we get into the on-court matchups for these teams, because what's weird is everything that was a weakness for the Magic, when they play the Pelicans, those things are not weaknesses. They tend to do very well. But I was just, one of the players that's been tied to these two franchises, every time there's speculation, is Wendell Carter Jr. And there's been a lot of just speculation on his future in Orlando. Is he someone that they want to invest in long term? And then, the Pelicans have been tied to him a number of times and their need for a big man. Now he's not the tallest of the tall, but he's a very capable front court player who can also step out on occasion and knock down the three every now and then. What is the Magic's feeling on Orlando? On Wendell Carter Jr. at this stage?
It's hard to figure out. I don't think the Magic are like actively shopping him or anything. I don't think that they're looking at things saying like, Wendell Carter's the weak link. We need to be thinking about how to move him. And certainly I would say any Wendell Carter deal that I've seen that doesn't bring back a center of like equal or greater value, I'm just like, I'm not doing that. I'm not giving up on Wendell that easily. But having said that, if you look at the Magic starting lineup, they're heavily invested in 4 of the 5 spots in the starting lineup. Franz Wagner just signed a fresh 5-year max extension that kicks in next summer. Paolo Banchero will sign his rookie max extension next summer. Jalen Suggs is probably going to get a deal done before is probably going to get a deal done before the deadline. Even if he doesn't, the Magic are matching just about anything that he would get in free agency. He's going to be with the team for the next 4 or 5 years. Kentavious Caldwell-Pope just signed a 3-year deal to be with the Magic, big free agent acquisition. That means if the Magic are looking to upgrade and improve their roster, they're really open at one spot and one spot only, and that's Wendell Carter's spot at center. And Wendell would probably be the first to tell you that he was not happy with how he played last year. He had by his standards, certainly a bad season, his worst season since joining the Magic. A lot of that has had to do with injuries. And he's had a lot of trouble with injuries. He's played only 60 games or more in a season once in his career. That was 62 games in the 2022 season with the Magic, his first full season with the Magic. This is a guy that is trying to prove that he can be healthy and that he can be the kind of center that you can win a championship with. And I think that's ultimately the question. Honestly, I think the Magic like Wendell Carter a lot. He provides a ton of versatility. He's an excellent screener, excellent passer. Like you mentioned, can step out and hit threes, not like an above the rim player as far as like throwing alley-oops or blocking shots, but he's an excellent rim protector. I would call him a paint protector. He kind of keeps you from getting to your spot where you can score easily, and he will be positionally in the right spot. He's hoping for a bounce back year health-wise, but at the end of the day, I think what's going to determine whether the Magic should stay invested in him or not is how he performs in the playoffs and whether he can stand up in those big moments that the Magic need to get that big rebound, to make that big play in the postseason. That's ultimately where I think a lot of these players get judged more than the regular season.
When you talk about big, we've seen there kind of be a transformation in the NBA where we're going back to bigger lineups
Yep.
in the front courts. And the Magic certainly are capable of matching any team in the league when it comes to size. When you got 6 players, 6'10" or taller in your main, top 15 players, Paolo Banchero, Franz Wagner, Mo Wagner, Wendell Carter Jr., Jonathan Isaac, and then you're also talking about adding Goga Batadze to that group. And Goga is somebody that a lot of people, love his upside and his potential in this league. To have the versatility that the Magic has and the length, and all of their bigs are guys who can be active for the most part. How fearsome is that front court when you stack it up to the other teams in the East?
Yeah, it's not necessarily, maybe not like front court in the way that we traditionally think about front court. I mean, it's very much new wave front court where you have essentially a lineup of guys who you feel comfortable playing 1 through 5. Like if Wendell Carter has to switch out onto a guard because that's what the defensive scheme calls for, the Magic are comfortable with that. They're comfortable with Goga Batadze doing that. Maybe not as comfortable with Mo Wagner, but they have this ability. I think Jeff Weltman joked about this during media day or shortly before media day. Their small lineup is still pretty big. It's, if they want to go small, and we will see a lineup like this at some point during the season, Jonathan Isaac, Paolo Banchero, Franz Wagner, Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, Jalen Suggs. Like Jalen Suggs is 6'5", KCP is 6'5". Franz and Paolo are 6'10". Jonathan Isaac is 6'11" and covers so much ground. Like that is a realistic lineup the Magic could throw out there that can just smother teams defensively if they want to, and be versatile enough where everyone can kind of do everything on offense. And that's, I think about this a lot as far as like you're building a championship team. To build a championship team, you got to do something that no one else can handle, that is just unique to you and makes you special. You can't copycat your way to a title. You have to have something that makes you different, that just is so tough for the elite teams to figure out. And the Magic have kind of hit on, we're just going to be ridiculously long. We're going to be ridiculously versatile. Yeah, I think there was a scout last year talking about the Magic's rise that was like, everyone talks about this positionless basketball thing. The Magic are the only team that were just like, F it, we're doing it. Like that's literally what the Magic can be if they, when they're at their peak. And obviously they're still so young. Paolo's 21, Franz is 22. They're still growing and getting better. And that's, I think, the scary part for a lot of teams around the league.
What's the next step in Paolo Banchero's evolution? We've seen him play make. We know he can rebound. We know he can score. Is it being more consistent? That's usually the thing for every pro, is getting to the point where you know what you're getting out of them every night. Is that really the next phase for Paolo?
I think the next phase for Paolo is just efficiency. It's been the big criticism of him. There are people naysaying him about his numbers and saying, oh, he scores a lot of points, but he needs a lot of shots to get there and all that. And that criticism is valid. Like, he's got to be more efficient. That's what's going to take him from the level he's at now to superstar level. And that's going to be the difference between essentially whether the Magic are a championship team or not. But Paolo would be the first to tell you that he has to reduce his turnovers. He has to make better decisions. He has to understand when he needs to impose himself on the game, when he needs to be a playmaker and a creator for others, when he needs to just soak attention and trust his teammates to get going. And I think that's something that every young star has to go through. I get frustrated listening to people talk about Paolo sometimes in this mark as if this is all he's going to be. And I'm just like, no, he's learning how to do all this. And so with Paolo, I think the next step for him is reducing his turnovers. I think that's a big thing, being more efficient with the ball in his hands, and then understanding when the time is for him to be the star and when he needs to keep the ball moving and keep things going. And that was something he showed in the playoffs. And I think the playoffs and his playoff performance showed that he really does have another level to his game to get to.
Is Franz the number two in this hierarchy, or is that still to be determined?
I think Franz is absolutely the number two in this hierarchy. And honestly, like, there'll be games where he's the number one guy and it's just the matchup works in his favor, or, just it's something that he likes, or he just has it going. Like, he just goes on these big scoring binges and, he's so good at just fitting in. Like, it's scary because, I think the biggest complaint Magic fans have had about Franz during his tenure with the Magic so far is they don't feel like he shoots the ball enough. And I look at the stats after the game. It's like he had the second most shots on the team. Like, he's getting his shots. So he'll have these stretches where it doesn't feel like he's involved, and you want him to impose himself in the game. And like Paolo, I think Paolo, I think, is more your natural ISO scorer. Like, he always gets compared to Carmelo Anthony. He's trying to figure out how to dial that back, or when to push that lever. Franz wants to be a teammate first and then figure out where he's going to get his scoring. And I think the Magic, want him to be more aggressive. But Franz is a really special player. He's an elite finisher at the rim. He's elite at getting to the basket. I don't think people realize that as much. And just, he's an elite cutter too. He doesn't need the ball to score. Like, he can find ways to be active even if he's not on the ball a lot, and he just makes the right play. He doesn't make a ton of mistakes. The shooting thing is the biggest question mark with him, but Franz Wagner is absolutely the number two guy on this team, and could be a number one guy on a lot of nights.
This team against the Pelicans in particular, that front court that we talked about, Paolo, Franz, Mo, Wendell Carter Jr., and Jonathan Isaac, combined for 82.5 points, 26 boards, and 17.5 assists in the two games against the Pelicans. Just so dominant. The Pelicans' biggest issue this year, and I think as you look at them, that's the question about this team, is its size. And now the Pelicans have lost Trey Murphy, who arguably was the Pelicans' second best player against the Magic last year. CJ McCollum averaged, I think, about 26 points in the two games against Orlando. And Trey Murphy was second, 17.5. Without him, this is a very small team. Like, the Pelicans want to play small ball, but against Orlando, I think that's magnified, and just that disadvantage is increased. Is that something that when you look at the matchup for these teams over the last few years, and it hasn't really mattered who the bigs have been over the years, they've all dominated the Pelicans.
Yeah, it's been weird, and you mentioned those stats about the Pelicans. I would note that I think Zion Williamson played in maybe only three of those, like two or three of those games. Like, the joke going around Orlando before the game last season in Orlando at the Kia Center was that Zion Williamson had played only one game at Kia Center, and it in the regular season at least, and it was during the COVID year. It was during the year when there's like no one in the stands or anything. That might have been New Orleans' last win over Orlando in the regular season. Don't quote me on that. But yeah, the Magic just put so much pressure on you with their size. And, Jonas Valanciunas is a big dude. Don't get it wrong, but he's not a rim protector. He's not kind of deterring people from the basket in the same way. And Wendell Carter does such a good job pulling bigs like him away from the basket to kind of create some of those driving lanes. Having said that too, like Paolo just loves the sightlines in the Smoothie King Center for some reason. Like his two regular season games, at least. I know they played a preseason game there last year. But his two regular season games in that building are probably two of my favorite Paolo games, where he just kind of took over at the end of games. So it's not like a lot of these are blowouts. The game last year, Kia Center, Brendan Ingram got hurt in the second quarter. That was a big factor in that game. But the Magic just do seem to have this matchup advantage with a team like New Orleans, where their size and their versatility, the fact that they can use their size on the perimeter, just gives them this huge advantage on a team like New Orleans. And it's just been something that's worked for them.
It's strange because the Pelicans are a very good team at defending the three, but against Orlando, I think again the bigs who shoot are getting clean looks because they're not looking at another 7 foot or 6'10" player when you're being guarded by 6'6". And yes, Herb Jones is as good a defender as there is in the NBA, and he blocks more threes than I think anybody else in the league. But that's a lot of pressure to put on him on a night-to-night basis. And I think certainly the Pelicans are going to try to take advantage with having DeJounte Murray now to try to eliminate some of the driving lanes on the perimeter. But that's maybe takes out Jalen Suggs. Maybe you take out Cole Anthony. But the issue up in the front court is still just, I think that's going to be the key for all three of these early season matchups.
Yeah, and it's going to be interesting to see how this changes. CJ McCollum put up some good numbers against Orlando,
Very
but
good.
Jalen Suggs still made him work for all those points. Like I like McCollum, I remember in that game in New Orleans last year, got himself going, but it took him a while. And Orlando kind of already established their lead by the time he found his rhythm. Having a second player like a DeJounte Murray, Orlando's got some great backcourt defenders. Don't get it wrong. Suggs and KCP are going to be a problem for a team like New Orleans, and it match up really well with a McCollum and a Murray to kind of counteract them. But Murray's had some big games against Orlando. Like he hit a game-winning three against Orlando in Mexico City last year. He had a buzzer-beating shot against Orlando in Atlanta last year. He likes playing the Magic. So it's going to be interesting to see how he changes maybe the pace of this team. He likes to push the ball a little bit more. I think New Orleans was a fairly slower team as far as fast break opportunities. It's going to be interesting to see how he changes the pace of that team. And like Orlando, they don't have like a quote unquote true point guard. They have a lot of guys that can play, make, and initiate offense. Even Zion, I think, can do it a little bit. It'll be interesting to see how those two teams match up and how the Magic kind of handle New Orleans going smaller. Even if that could be a little bit of a trouble for them, as they, everyone struggles to guard Zion. Like Zion's his own deal, but Orlando's had some success against him.
I'm one of those people that, I want to make sure that I don't take away too much from any preseason game. I'm much more looking at aesthetic things and principles. And for the Pelicans this year, establishing more pace, getting up more threes is critical when you're playing a small ball team. But like you said, Orlando certainly has its goals as well. What are you looking for from out of the Magic in these first two preseason games?
Yeah, I think a little bit of that too. Like, Orlando's talked a lot about increasing their pace and not necessarily more possessions, but getting into their offense faster. This first preseason game, the Magic will actually play a game in San Antonio between their two games against New Orleans. So the second Pelicans game will be their third preseason game, the third of four. So I think Friday will be a little bit more of a dress rehearsal, but this first game, especially it being a 1:30 tip or 1:30 Eastern tip, 12:30 Central tip, it feels like it could be a little weird. And so to me, what I want to see is, are you getting good shots? Are you kind of doing the process of getting good shots, whether they go in or not? It's the first game. Everyone's maybe a little bit nervous. Everyone's a little, maybe too jacked up. I'm not so concerned about that. Are you getting good? Are you getting good looks? Are you getting the looks that you want? And are you, not turning the ball over crazily? Like, are the turnovers aggressive turnovers? Are they miscommunication turnovers? Or are they just turnovers where you're throwing the ball around? I want to see, like, in preseason, I want to see like good turnovers, which are aggressive turnovers, like, oh, I thought you were going this way. We're still not quite on the same page yet.
Mhm.
I don't want to see turnovers where you're just kind of going up and down, throwing the ball around, trying to make crazy plays. I just want to see the principles and the basics of what you're trying to do so that you can keep growing on them as you get deeper and deeper into the preseason.
Before I let you go, let me ask you, if you are making a prediction for the Magic this season, do you think that they're a team that finishes in the top half of the Eastern Conference playoff standings, and can they get out of the first round?
It's really interesting. Like, I go back and forth on this. It's gonna be a fan. I think the Magic are a better team than they were last year. I want to start there. I think that they are more talented, but you know this in the Western Conference, and it's becoming this way in the Eastern Conference now. The margin between the 2 seed and the 7 seed is just so incredibly narrow. It's just such a small thing. We saw this a little bit last year. The Magic got the 5 seed because they won their last game of the season. If they would have lost, they would have been the 8. Like, that's kind of the difference in the Eastern Conference right now. So I think that Orlando is very capable of being a top 4 seed. I think it can definitely happen. I have a lot of questions about their offense. I have a lot of questions about whether their offense will take that kind of leap. And really, it comes down to, is Paolo Banchero going to go from an all-star to an all-NBA player? Is Franz Wagner going to be an all-star this year instead of just a very good young player? Those are the kind of things that have to happen for the Magic to get there. And, it's easy to predict and say, like, it's going to happen eventually. Trying to predict when it's going to happen is going to be a challenge. I think the Magic are at the very least as good as they were last year. The East did get better. Philadelphia, barring Joel Embiid being injured for another 50 games, it is going to not be the 7 seed. So teams are going to get pushed down very naturally. And again, it's going to come down to 1 or 2 games. Maybe, someone sprains an ankle in January and they're out for a week. And that's the reason why the team that could be the 3 or the 4 seed is sitting at 6 or 7 at the end of the season. So I think that the Magic are a better team. I think that they're a very dangerous team in the Eastern Conference. I think they're very capable of getting to a top 4 seed. I think they're very capable of winning a playoff series, even coming from the road like they did last year against Cleveland. It's just going to be very, very little things that are hard to predict in October. So I won't go completely on a limb here, but I do think the Magic are in that discussion to accomplish these goals.
Absolutely, and I think that early November matchup between these 2 teams, both teams have circled on their calendars because it's a must-win. I mean, when you only get 2 games against the other conference opponent, you want to win those home matchups. And for the Pelicans, I think it's one of those litmus test games. It's a team that you have struggled with in the past. It's a playoff caliber team, and you've got to steal a couple of those on the road over the course of the year. So I think I'm really looking forward to the regular season matchups between these because it's a contrast of styles, a contrast of rosters, and you get some high level players that could be challenging, if not for all NBA votes. If the best comes out of both of these teams, Zion and Paolo are both probably MVP candidates. If you were playing at their optimum level this season, that's a possibility. I'm not saying they win it, but I mean, you put yourself in that conversation if you max out what these teams can do. But Phillip, thank you so much for your time. Please tell the folks how they can keep up with your work each and every day, especially with the Locked On podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. The best place to find my work is over at OrlandoMagicDaily.com. That's where you can find my written work. If you want to see me talk about the Magic, Locked On Magic, you can find that on YouTube or wherever you download podcasts. 5 days a week during the season. Plus, when they do weekend games, I'll talk on the weekend. But Locked On Magic is the place to go for the latest on the Magic.
Hopefully, we'll get to talk before that November matchup between the Pelicans and the Magic. For Phillip Rossman-Reich, I'm David Grubb, and this has been another episode of The Bird Calls.